Humanity, to you and me, means a multitude of things, but primarily, it is the inhabitants of the planet Earth. In science fiction, though, we have to relax the majority of our understandings of what humanity is. In a lot of popular sci-fi, Earth is the home planet of a spacefaring humanity. All those who can trace their ancestry back to Earth, no matter how distant, could call themselves human. Even in settings where Earth is a long-distant memory, we would recognize appropriate characters as human, such as those in Dune and Andromeda. What makes us recognize something as human isn't based on simply appearance, but also behaviors and shared understandings of rudimentary things. That could be simple ideas, like sleep is important, or even more complicated philosophies like money has value, whilst its material is worth nearly nothing. What makes us recognize something as human in a sci-fi setting is the general consensus amongst the consumers and the fans that, no matter the specifics of the setting, character X is human. In endless space, humanity comes in all shapes, sizes, and appearances. Humanity has spread itself wide across the galaxy, each seeking something for themselves. Seeking the greatest profit, seeking the secrets of the universe, seeking a new home, seeking ultimate power, seeking the truth of the gods, seeking beautiful perfection. Their ingenuity and perseverance has allowed them the opportunity to make a home on every planet. As uncountable as the stars in the heavens has humanity seen its heroes rise and fall, and even some eternally remaining. Yet, as vast as the galaxy and the universe is, the tale of humanity in endless space always returns to the same place and to the same person. Raya, Jewel in the Stars, and Emperor Maximilian Zelavas, its indefatigable autocrat. Where this story begins is upon a world hidden in the dark seas of space. To retrace the steps of the ancestors of the Empire, who sailed the stars as tireless explorers, would be a Herculean trial. Somewhere, orbiting one of the billions of stars, is the ancient home of humanity, Mezan, Lost Mezan, as it is now known, and those explorers who carved a trailblaze through the cosmos were the Mezari. The first instance of the Mezari that we encounter in the timeline of the Endless Universe is in Dungeon of the Endless. In one of my earlier videos, 7 years ago that is, I examined the origin of the SS Success. As the only image that we had of it at the time was of its aft thrusters, which didn't match any ship known to the community at the time, I couldn't soundly conclude who had made the ship. Since then, both Dungeon of the Endless and Endless Legend went from alpha to full release, and Endless Space 2 was developed, etc. It's been a long time. Nonetheless, we now know that the ship does not belong to the United Empire. Indeed, the United Empire didn't even exist, nor would it exist, for another millennia or so. The SS Success was a ship of Mezari design, a penal colony transport with a curated crew of skilled undesirables with a clandestine agenda to find new worlds and begin the Mezari domination of the galaxy. Of course, whoever was in charge of this expedition could not have known that the ship would pass by Auriga, causing the planet's defense systems to come to life and shoot the ship down, could they? Whoever it was, they were certain that all inhabitants of the ship would never return to Mezan, or Mazen, as it is called in the photograph, probably just a spelling error though. The survivors of the SS Success took refuge on Auriga. Though not all of those who crash-landed would take the option of hiding within the vaulted caverns as the bloodline of Zolya did. Some would develop a culture of nomadism and trade, or a more stereotypical chivalric philosophy, juxtaposed by their vampiric need to absorb life and dust. Those human races of endless legend, the ardent mages, the roving clans, the wild walkers, the broken lords, the vaulters, and the forgotten, although not always directly, are in some part descendants of the Mezari. The reason I discern the term descendant with directly is because of an interesting detail in the novella The Last Flight of the Grey Owl. For a more detailed overview of the narrative, I would recommend that you watch my video Who Are the Hisho, but to put it briefly, The Last Flight of the Grey Owl is the story of the Hishos' escape from their subjugation as slaves and gladiators to the concrete endless on Psychogogia. During this story, we are told that there are two Ryans in the group trying to escape the planet. Ryans come from the planet Raya, the planet that the future United Empire would rule from one day. Now, this adds a couple concerns that we're going to tackle briefly. Firstly, when does the story take place? Well, as suggested during the story, the events take place at the outset of the Dust Wars, the conflict that would eventually lead to the Endless destroying themselves. By the end, they are setting course for Auriga, which I suggested to still be under the control of the Concrete due to the lack of any Hisho other than Hikensha in Dungeon of the Endless and Endless Legend. And for those who spotted the visual clue in my video, the likelihood that the minor faction, the Nidya, are the mutated forms of the survivors of the Grey Owl. So, Dungeon of the Endless takes place some time after the events of the novella, and many centuries before Endless Legend. Secondly, if these two Ryans are on Psychogogia, one of which was able to escape aboard the Grey Owl, could they be subjects of the United Empire? Well, no, because the United Empire would not exist for a long time yet, but could they be Mezari from Raya? Well, yes, they could very possibly be, but only if we are willing to believe that the Mezari were already spaceborne before the Dust Wars. It's not by any means impossible, but it does beg the question why the Endless had interacted with the Mezari, and why two of them, at least, had been transported to Psychogogia of all places. Only one of the Ryans survived to escape Psychogogia and was aboard the Grey Owl when it eventually landed on Auriga. What happened to them after that point is unknown and is also somewhat disconnected from the events of Dungeon of the Endless, but is critical to the story in Endless Legend. This disconnection is due to the unknown amount of time between The Last Flight of the Grey Owl and Dungeon of the Endless. I'm inclined to believe that it is a significant amount of time, however, or at least long enough for the Husk of Knowledge to have fallen into the state of disrepair that we see in the game, and for the human sub-faction, the Sisters of Mercy, to have developed upon Auriga, as evidenced by Mizzy Curtis. Humanity's reign on Auriga after the Dust Wars was dominant. Of 11 major factions, 6 of them consist of humans, and an additional one appears to be led by a mutated human. But of all of these factions, only one of them, the Vaulters, would collectively escape the death of Auriga aboard the ships the Grey Owl and the Argosy, and a few others would only survive with a single representative. I've gone all the way to the end of Endless Legend without talking about what we know of Mezari culture, so please allow yourself to store what we've talked about, and we will rewind to Dungeon of the Endless. The SS Success, as we now know, was a Mezari ark, but where did the heroes aboard it come from, and why were they aboard that ill-fated journey in the first place? From the questline Downfall between Elise Ness and Rakya Pulmoni, we can glean that Mazari judiciary structure was quite akin to Wild West sheriff justice. Elise, nicknamed Boom Boom for her preferred approach, has free rein to rope in mercenaries to solve a case and catch a criminal, as well as rack up an eye-watering damage insurance premium. Rakia Pulmoni's hacking business, Gork's unrepentant piracy, and the apparent notoriety of Josh and Tello's gang indicate that criminal enterprises were a dangerous but lucrative source of income, and with an apparent large issue with inter-system crime syndicates, there was also a large industry for mercenaries and bounty hunters. It's not entirely clear who the Groits were, but Ken Masakui and Opbot reveal that the Mazari were either in open warfare with another civilization, or that the military structure of Mazari systems relied heavily on mercenaries, and it's probably the latter. The Mazari Dominion appeared to be stretched far and wide across the galaxy. A lot of the characters in Dungeon of the Endless hopped between systems to pursue their lifestyle, but unfortunately, none of them were able to find a real home out there in the galaxy. The stage of Mazari technology is hard to judge. Heroes like Opbot, Sarah Numas, and Chef Nanor use old-fashioned weaponry, that being swords and spears, whereas some other heroes use six-shooters, submachine guns, and even miniguns. Whilst this technology is quite familiar to us, the Mazari also seem to have the technology to, of course, travel vast distances through space with such a level of speed that one can hop between systems in a single lifetime, develop true AI that is capable of genuine empathy and homicidal nervous breakdowns, and construct a slew of quick-fix tools and healing items out of the scrap they find around them. But most importantly, the Mazari appear to have the technology to construct a tool that is capable of absorbing and redirecting dust. Now, you might not think that to be quite as interesting as me, but allow me to try and convince you. When you start a game of Endless Space 2, depending on your spawn location, luck, and understanding of the mechanics of the game, unlocking the tech to buy out system improvements with dust is an important step that can take a long time. The important part being this: you do not start with it, only the Nakalim do. Equally, exposure to dust has been shown to be incredibly deadly if done unsupervised or by accident. If an individual survives, however, they become enhanced by great magnitudes, and yet, the heroes of Dungeon of the Endless are able to wade into dust-soaked rooms and extract dust from the corpses of their enemies safely, and to have it diverted to the crystal, where it can be stored and redistributed as they see fit. The Mazari are able to do what no empire in Endless Space 2, save the Nakalim, are able to do. The Nakalim are a race that existed alongside and worshipped the lost, beings made entirely out of dust. However, all factions in Endless Space 1 are able to control dust to buy out system improvements right from the beginning of the game, so the only explanation I can think of at the moment that would explain why the factions in Endless Space 2 can't do it is this. Amplitude Studios, upon reflection during development of Endless Space 2, decided that controlling dust ought to be a tech that each faction needs to unlock. The Mazari also seem to have at least one immortal, whose fate within the Husk of Knowledge would lead to shaping a great force within the galaxy. Ilona Zolia, leader of the Volters in both Endless Legend and Endless Space 2, distinctly remembers her Mazari heritage, and is familiar with the sign language shared amongst students and leaders of the Academy. Not only is Ilona Zolia immortal, but it would seem that her immortality is a genetic trait. Her daughter, Judith, can be found on Auriga 2.0, millennia after the events of Endless Legend. The Zolias, or perhaps simply Ilona herself, seem to have created quite a legend for themselves in the absence of structured Mazari history. The United Empire's main exploration ship is known as the Zolia class, and it's named after a mythical warrior queen. The fates of the heroes of Dungeon of the Endless are mostly unclear, It can be assumed that some chose to remain underground, preferring the danger they had come to know well, whereas some would venture onto the surface to make a new future. But some also died. Sarah Numas, an energetic and single-minded bounty hunter, perished in the clutches of some tentacled monster. Max O'Kane, antique enthusiast and acquirer, and Gork the Butcher also die somewhere deep and dark within the dungeons of the Husk of Knowledge. Each hero in the game has their own story to share with a specific set of other heroes, and with the player themselves, of course. But there is one hero I've not yet spoken about. They are the orchestrator of all of this, and ultimately the murderer of hundreds aboard the SS Success, and responsible for the deaths of all those who met their gruesome fate in the dungeon. He is Horatio, the most perfect.